This message comes from First Leaf. First Leaf takes care of the wine for your summer. First Leaf's short quiz figures out what you like, then delivers a summer-ready box. Bright whites, smooth reds, and chillable bubbles. Go to firstleaf.com/summertime with promo SUMMERTIME.
Hello, hello. I'm Brittany Luce, and you're listening to It's Been a Minute from NPR, a show about what's going on in culture and why it doesn't happen by accident. So before we start the show, I want to address the elephant in the room. You may have heard that Congress and the White House clawed back funding for NPR and PBS. And since you're listening to this NPR podcast, I bet you might have some questions about what that means. Well, the best person to answer those questions is our CEO, Catherine Maher. And yesterday, she dropped a special message for all of you in our feed. I highly encourage you to check that out. And a personal note for me, I love exploring culture with all of you. And I hope this moment is a chance for all of us to get even more invested in being curious about the world we live in. And with that, let's get into it. When you think about places of community, gathering, or fellowship, what comes to mind? Maybe a local rec center, church, or even a public park. But what about diners? Yes, you heard me right. Your local 24/7 diner for truck drivers, post-prom debriefs, and family breakfasts is also a safe space for people who may need a side of kindness with their eggs.
You can do things at a diner that you can't or really shouldn't do at a gay bar. You don't want to be that gay at the club who's like sobbing, at a breakup.
That is Erik Piepenburg, New York Times writer and author of Dining Out, First Dates, Defiant Nights, and Last Call Disco Fries at America's gay restaurants.
I came out in the 90s and came of age as a gay man in the 90s, and gay restaurants were everywhere in the gay neighborhoods that I lived in Washington, D.C., in Chicago, and New York City, and I hadn't been seeing gay restaurants quite like I had.
Dining Out explores how gay restaurants, diners, and coffee shops have existed beyond just a space for food after the club, but as sites of gay history and activism.
We know a lot about gay bars, but we don't know nearly enough about gay restaurants. One of my favorite chapters that I talk about this gay golden age really is about lesbian restaurants, where there was a sense of politics is important to who we are. Feminism, lesbian rights, animal rights.
But I bet you're wondering, what makes a restaurant gay? Pride flags? Maybe a drag brunch? That's certainly part of it, but it's a bit more nuanced than that.
I mean, look, these diners that I went to when I was in high school, when I was in college, living in Chicago, there were no pride flags all over the dining room, but they were still gay because they were in gay neighborhoods and gay people went there. In a lot of cases, like diners, they became gay depending on the time of day. You might go there at 10 a.m. and it's mostly straight. You go there at 3 a.m. after the clubs and it's mostly gay.
For Erik, the temporal quality of these restaurants is part of what makes them queer. But he says the loud and proud places are still important, especially in the Midwest or South.
Look, there's a hot gay chef who opened up a restaurant in Miami. I'm like, okay, what else is new? I don't know. I'm kind of bored by that. I wanted to go to cities that we don't think of as necessarily having a gay restaurant scene, but they absolutely do, because I think those stories are really, really undertold.
This is Food for Thought. And for the next few weeks, we're looking at the way food and dining shape our communities and culture. Today, Erik joins me to dive into the golden age of gay restaurants and how diners have been unsung staples of gay placemaking. I've seen this across culture where people are looking for gathering spaces that aren't focused on alcohol and drinking. It sounds like a diner would also fit that as well for people who are on a sobriety journey, a place that you could be without having to feel like pressure to imbibe or something like that. There's like a lot more flexibility.
Yeah, the flexibility, I think, is a great word. I was at a party recently with much younger gays, and they talked about the sense of a third space. Where are the third spaces for us to go to, where it's not a bar, it's not a club, and I was sort of joking. I said, well, we used to have those places. They were everywhere. They were called gay coffee shops, or gay bars that served food, or gay bookstores that had a cafe. And I think there was a little bit of surprise that those happened. And so I hope that if there is this thirst for a third space, that gay restaurants or gay coffee shops, cafes could be part of that discussion.
Oh, I love that. That's such a good point. And it was interesting. Like I used to live in Washington, D.C., and also I live in New York. And there was places that you mentioned that that didn't exist anymore. And I had that kind of feeling of like, I wonder what's in its place, and I go and look it up, and it's like, it's not like a similar business replaced, say Lambda Rising in DC that used to be on Connecticut Avenue.
Oh, Lambda Rising.
Yeah.
Oh, I miss Lambda Rising.
Yeah, I mean, it was a wonderful place. Give me a picture of the gay restaurant golden age of like the 1960s and what made it so special.
Yeah, these were restaurants that we're talking in the lead up to Stonewall, and certainly in the 70s and 80s and well into the 90s, that unlike restaurants before, where you might not even know it was a restaurant because the windows were blackened out and there was no signage anywhere, you just sort of had to know where to go. These restaurants opened the doors. These restaurants took the curtains off of the windows and proudly exclaimed, "We are a gay restaurant. You are welcome here." And that was a big departure from the restaurants that I write about early in the book in the 20s and 30s, where it was a restaurant where gay people just knew to go. This golden age of restaurants said, no, we are proudly going to be gay. And I think one of my favorite chapters in that I talk about this gay golden age really is about lesbian restaurants that started to sort of come about in the late 60s and well into the 70s and early 80s, where there was a sense of politics is important to who we are. Feminism, lesbian rights, animal rights. A lot of these restaurants were vegan or vegetarian. Those sort of informed the ethos of these restaurants. And I think more so than maybe restaurants for gay men. And let's be clear, back in this golden age, there were primarily restaurants for gay men, and there were restaurants for lesbians, and the two really didn't meet, which is very different than today, when it's much more of a mixture of men and women and gay and lesbian and trans, and everyone is sort of welcome in the door. That wasn't the case in these early gay restaurants. But at a restaurant like Bloodroot in Bridgeport, Connecticut, which I talk about in the book, politics is baked into that restaurant.
I wonder, I mean, you visited so many restaurants for your book. Is there a place that you visited that's still open today, or even could be a newer restaurant that really embodies the kind of excitement that you feel like was captured during the gay restaurant golden age?
Yeah, I think so, but very differently. There's a restaurant in New York City in the East Village called Hags. Yes. Very fine dining restaurant. It's a little high of a price point, but on Sundays, I think they still have this on Sundays, it's pay what you can, and the pay what you can days happen to be the queerest days of the week. Hags is the only restaurant I've been to where there is a little container of buttons that have different pronouns on them, and you can pick whatever pronoun button you want, and so you can put it on you, and your server knows how to address you. And if you go to Hags, you will find that the kitchen, the people who work there are very queer and non-binary and trans, which again was very different than what it was in the 70s and 80s. But that sense of we need this space, this is a safe space for us, it still captures that spirit of what it was like for gay people to eat together in the 70s, years after Stonewall. That same spirit is really at play there.
Wow. Taking a hard left from fine dining and going back to what you were talking about earlier with regard to the diner, I loved your chapter on diners being inherently gay spaces. Like it reminded me of hanging out with my friends at diners across Michigan and in Washington, D.C., going to rehearsals for the school play or, hitting gay clubs and parties together. Why do you think that sentiment that diners are inherently gay has endured, even as many of the establishments that you wrote about in the book have shuttered?
I think one of the reasons is because diners in general are for everybody. They generally are 24 hours, run by Greek immigrant families, and they serve every kind of meal from the meat eater to the vegan. You can pretty much find anything on that menu, and they're usually pretty affordable. The queerness of a diner, I would say, is because you can do things at a diner that you can't or really shouldn't do at a gay bar. You can cry with your friends after a breakup at a diner, and that's okay. And
People do that at the club.
You know, they
but
do.
I agree. It's not as fun. That makes it not as fun.
Yeah, you don't want to be that gay at the club who's like sobbing, at a breakup. But yeah, that happens there too. But you can have a conversation. You can cry and you can have a conversation at a restaurant. You can organize at a gay restaurant. ACT UP, the AIDS activist organization, met every Monday night at Woody's in the West Village here in Manhattan after the ACT UP meeting ended because there was more work to do. You can be a teenager and go to a diner, and you're too young to get in the club, but you and your nerdy gay friends can go to a diner. On the flip side, you can be a gay elder, and you can be 80, and you don't want to go to the club because it's too expensive. You can't afford the cocktails. It's too loud. You feel ignored at a gay bar. But at a gay restaurant, you can be with your friends. You can be by yourself if you wanted and still feel like, oh, I'm part of the gay community. Even though I'm not at the bar, I'm still part of this world.
Coming up,
I think for a lot of people, the AIDS years is ancient history in a lot of ways. And I wanted to make sure that when I wrote this book, that restaurants that were open and served the gay community during the AIDS crisis were valued and respected. Because at a lot of these restaurants, it was okay to cry.
How gay restaurants and diners became memorial spaces for those who were lost to AIDS.
Support for this podcast and the following message come from Made in Cookware. President and co-founder Jake Kalick shares a tool that's useful for both master and newbie griller.
The craftsmanship of the carbon steel griddle enhances your grilling experience because it allows you a totally different type of grill surface that opens up the amounts of food you're able to cook. So the griddle is the perfect accessory to add to your grill and kind of widen your grilling game.
Learn more about Made in Cookware at madeincookware.com. This message comes from Revenued. Revenued offers fast, flexible funding for businesses, up to $250,000 for the highest revenue category, with approvals in as little as one business day. Funds are made available on demand, and the cost of capital is based on a fixed factor rate applied to the amount you draw. There are no application fees, no draw fees, and no maintenance fees. Apply now at getrevenued.com and be ready for whatever comes next. Support for NPR and the following message come from USPS. With USPS Ground Advantage service, it's like your shipment has a direct line to you. It leaves the dock, you know about it. It's on the road, you know. And when it reaches your customer, you guessed it, you're still in the know. Here's the real game changer. It's one journey, one partner, total peace of mind. Check out USPS Ground Advantage service at usps.com/in-the-know. Because if you know, you know.
Support for this podcast and the following message come from Middlesex County, New Jersey. Food manufacturing companies like Gong Cook are there and benefit from the location, infrastructure, and cost of doing business. Middlesex County, New Jersey provides access to over 50 million customers in the Northeast Corridor without the costs of other major metropolitan areas. Your business can be there and benefit from this too. Go to discovermiddlesex.com/food to learn all the advantages and connect with a dedicated business advisor.
You know, something else that I really appreciated about this book is how you talked about restaurants as a place of refuge during the AIDS crisis, during the height of the AIDS epidemic in the 1980s. I want to talk about the restaurant as a space for grieving. I believe you used the word, I think, sanctuary or chapel in that chapter as well. Talk to me about the restaurant as a place for really leaning on community.
I think for a lot of people, the AIDS years is ancient history in a lot of ways. And I wanted to make sure that when I wrote this book, that restaurants that were open and served the gay community during the AIDS crisis were valued and respected. Because at a lot of these restaurants, it was okay to cry. It was okay to mourn. It was okay to be there with your friends, to laugh and to remember people that you lost. And I think of a restaurant like Annie's Paramount Steakhouse, to go back to Washington, D.C., which has been open since the late 40s and is still open in DuPont Circle, and never turned away people who are suffering. I think that makes Annie's like a kind of chapel, memorial, and that meant the world to people who didn't know where else to go. Maybe they were estranged from their families, but they knew that they could go to their family at Annie's because they would be welcomed there. And I wanted to make sure that that era and those restaurants that opened their doors were respected. I also want to point out that during these awful years, people also went out to have fun, even for one night. Maybe everything else was awful in your life, but you could go to a gay restaurant like Annie's and you could still enjoy yourself and listen to music and flirt and have fun. Annie's offered you a place where maybe you could smile and laugh, even just for one night.
That kind of care and love that you put into that section of the book, it really comes through on the page. And I think about that columnist that you referenced during the height of the AIDS crisis in the 80s, who would print like the different obituaries. He would scan the obituaries and, share obituaries of gay men who had passed away. And just thinking about that individual act of memorializing and how important that was. And this book, in a way, kind of feels like an act of memorializing as well. As you've described it, it really came across that way.
Gay bars have also been places of remembering people during hard times, but really gay restaurants, just because they're restaurants and the way that they're set up and the way the space is and how we come together over food, I think is very different from a gay bar. And so I wanted to make sure that when I do talk about sort of these darker themes in my book, that we remembered that gay restaurants stepped in ways that I think we undervalue and underappreciate. Look, there were AIDS benefits at bars and nightclubs, certainly, but gay restaurants, I think, opened their doors in ways that are a little bit different. I wanted to make sure that those were never forgotten.
Eric, a lot of things have changed since you were eating at the Melrose in Chicago.
Yes, they have.
A lot of things have changed. As we have discussed, the Melrose and so many queer spaces like it are now gone. And there are a lot of reasons for that. Gentrification, rising rents for businesses across the country, COVID. I mean, I could go on. A sentiment that I've heard before from queer people of all age, but especially of older generations, is that one of the things that can come with like greater societal acceptance is like sometimes a collapsing of queer spaces into mainstream spaces. How do you see these disappearing spaces affecting the queer community and even Americans more broadly? And what do you hope for the future of the gay restaurant?
Yeah, that's a really great question, because I think as our spaces disappear, and look, no one knows this better than lesbians, lesbian bars have disappeared, have shockingly gone away. And I think we lose something when we have these spaces that carve out who they're made for. And do we want to go back to the days when it was only men in this restaurant and women in this restaurant? Not necessarily. But I am someone who thinks that gay restaurants in some ways are great equalizers today, because they are generally for everyone. Now, that's a very New York City thing to say. I think if you go back home to Cleveland or Green Bay, Wisconsin, another city that I visited in my book, I'm not sure if that's necessarily the case. I think in other parts of the country, certainly in the Midwest and in the South, these are very much safe spaces. I think about Naps in Green Bay, Wisconsin, the restaurant that I visited. It's a bar that serves food, and once a month they have a trans mixer for trans people all over the region. And that is the one day of the month that people in the trans community there can be themselves. And so I think as those spaces disappear, I think we are losing something culturally, spiritually, but also in terms of safety. That said, I'm very optimistic about the future of gay restaurants, queer restaurants, whatever you want to call them, because gay people like to have dinner out with their friends just as much as anybody else does. And that's no different. And yes, the restaurant industry is a tough industry. Those of you who watch The Bear, you know this is a really tough industry, gay or straight. But I think gay people have always found a way to come together outside of the bars and clubs. And I think restaurants can continue to serve vital roles no matter where you are in the country. So yeah, we've lost a lot of spaces, but I think we are going to continue to thrive in ways that I think we haven't totally understood yet. And I'm excited about that.
Oh my gosh. Well, Erik, you got me excited too. I really appreciate this conversation. Thank you so much. And thank you for this book.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the conversation.
That was New York Times writer and author Erik Piepenburg. Dining Out is available right now wherever you get your books. And I'm going to put on my influencer hat for a second and ask you to please subscribe to this show on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you're listening. Click follow so you know the latest in culture while it's still hot. This episode of It's Been a Minute was produced by
Alexis Williams.
This episode was edited by
Nina Patak.
Our supervising producer is
Barton Girdwood.
Our executive producer is
Verilyn Williams.
Our VP of programming is
Yolanda Sanguini.
All right, that's all for this episode of It's Been a Minute from NPR. I'm Brittany Luce. Talk soon.
Support for NPR and the following message come from IXL Online. Is your child asking questions on their homework you don't feel equipped to answer? IXL Learning uses advanced algorithms to give the right help to each kid, no matter the age or personality. One subscription gets you everything. One site for all the kids in your home, pre-K to 12th grade. Make an impact on your child's learning. Get IXL now. And NPR listeners can get an exclusive 20% off IXL membership when they sign up today at IXL.com/NPR. This message comes from Mint Mobile. If you're tired of spending hundreds on big wireless bills, bogus fees, and free perks, Mint Mobile might be right for you with plans starting from $15 a month. Shop plans today at mintmobile.com/switch. Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month 5 GB plan required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details.
This message comes from Ritual. What makes Ritual vitamins different? Ritual vitamins are made with bioavailable, clinically studied key ingredients, as well as the essence of mint. Get 25% off your first purchase when you visit ritual.com/NPR.